The Siege of Grand Pré happened during Father Loutre's war and was fought between the British and the Wabanaki Confederacy and Acadian militia. The siege happened at Fort Vieux Logis, Grand Pré. The native and Acadia militia laid siege to Fort Vieux Logis for a week in November 1749. One historian states that the intent of the siege was to help facilitate the Acadian Exodus from the region. Historical context: despite the British conquest of Acadia in 1710, Nova Scotia remained primarily occupied by Catholic Acadians and Mi'kmaq. By the time Cornwallis had arrived in Halifax, there was a long history of the Wabanaki Confederacy protecting the land by killing British civilians along the New England-Acadia border in Maine, to prevent the establishment of Protestant settlements in the region. Mi'kmaq raided the early British settlements of present-day Shelburne and Canso. A generation later, Father Loutre's War began when Edward Cornwallis arrived to establish Halifax with 13 transports on June 21, 1749. By unilaterally establishing Halifax, the British were violating earlier treaties with the Mi'kmaq, which were signed after Father Rail's War. Within 18 months of establishing Halifax, the British also took firm control of Peninsula Nova Scotia by building fortifications in all the major Acadian communities, present-day Windsor, Grand Pré and Chignecto. There were numerous Mi'kmaq and Acadian raids on these fortifications, such as the Siege of Grand Pré. Just prior to the siege, on September 30, 1749, about 40 Mi'kmaq attacked 6 men who were cutting trees at a sawmill in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia. 4 of them were killed on the spot, 1 was taken prisoner and 1 escaped. 2 of the men were scalped and the heads of the others were cut off. A detachment of Rangers was sent after the raiding party and cut off the heads of 2 Mi'kmaq and scalped 1. As a result of history of Wabanaki Confederacy raids against British settlers on the New England-Acadia border and the recent raid in Dartmouth, on October 2, 1749, Cornwallis offered a bounty on the head of every Mi'kmaq. He set the amount at the same rate that the Mi'kmaq received from the French for British scalps. As well, to carry out this task, 2 companies of Rangers were raised, one led by Captain Francis Bartello and the other by Captain William Clapham. These 2 companies served alongside that of John Gorham's company. The 3 companies scoured the land around looking for Mi'kmaq. After the destruction of Mirligesh, the Siege of Grand Pré was the first recorded conflict after Cornwallis's bounty proclamation. The siege. On November 27, 1749, 300 Mi'kmaq, Maliseet, Penobscot and Acadian militia attacked Fort Vieux Logis at Grand Pré. The fort was under the command of John Handfield of the 40th Regiment of Foot. The native and Acadian militia killed the sentries who were firing on them. The natives then captured Lieutenant John Hamilton and 18 soldiers under his command, while surveying the fort's environs. After the capture of the British soldiers, the native and Acadian militias made several attempts over the next week to lay siege to the fort before breaking off the engagement. When Gorham's Rangers arrived, the militia had already departed with the prisoners to Chignecto. Aftermath. On March 18, 1750, Gorham's Rangers left Fort Sackville, under orders from Governor Cornwallis to march to Pisiquid. The mission was to establish a blockhouse at Pisiquid, and to seize the property of Acadians who had participated in the Siege of Grand Pré. Cornwallis later arrested the Acadians and Father Girard who were involved in the siege. The Mi'kmaq and Acadians continued raids on the Protestant settlements, such as the raid on Dartmouth and the raid on Lunenburg, Nova Scotia. For the Maliseet, it was the first breach of the peace treaty treaty that had made with Cornwallis months earlier. The prisoners spent 2 years in captivity before being ransomed. In August 1751, Lt. John Hamilton and his father-in-law from his first marriage, William Sheriff, negotiated the release for Hamilton and the other 60 Englishmen who had been imprisoned over the 2 years. The governor and council paid the Loutre's ransom of £882 to release 60 prisoners of officers, soldiers and settlers, including Hamilton. As late as June 1754, Captain Hamilton wrote Governor Lawrence a letter of support for Abbé Loutre.